Alright, what is up, legends? We are back with another video with your dude, Jay. This week, we are going over rigging. Quick and dirty. Well, I don't know about quick, but it's a really simple way to rig, doing the bare minimum to rig, so you can get a model going as soon as possible, so you don't have to be stuck with a PNG or whatever it is you're using. You know, that's the whole purpose of this series, really, is to show that, you know, you can do the bare minimum fairly quickly. And really my focus was just that, to get something out there as soon as possible. So we are going over rigging today from when we did cutting last week. So I know for a lot of people, Live2D rigging is something that's very daunting, right? And for me initially too. When I first booted up this app, I saw all of these fucking little windows and all these fucking little things, and I was just like, holy shit, how the fuck am I gonna rig my model? I don't know what any of this shit does. Because, you know, obviously I'm someone who specializes in Photoshop. So when I opened up this new app, I'm just like, dude, what the fuck is a parameter? What's a mesh? What the fuck is this? What the fuck is that? And, you know, realistically, much like Photoshop and other digital arts, about 80% of it is irrelevant. You can just start going in there and get something working relatively quickly. That's what I learned when I made my chibi, is that you don't even have to make it perfect. You can make it pretty sloppy, but the end product will still be something that looks decently passable, right? Because when you look at my model, I think my mouth is just crazy jank a lot of times. But for what it's worth, like, it's not the end of the fucking world, you know? Like, everything else still moves relatively okay for something that I rigged in about a week. And, you know, ultimately it's better than the reactive PNG. You know, I rather, you know, use a somewhat jankily rigged Live2D than a PNG. And I think most people would agree with that. So hopefully what I show you here can help you be less intimidated by this app. Obviously, I'm not an expert. I just looked at a few tutorials and rigged this shit just randomly in a week. So I won't be able to provide the most technical explanations, but hopefully I can introduce some basic concepts that will make the app a little bit easier to digest. Because I think the biggest flaw with my rig job here is that I didn't really have any clean parameters and proper mesh groups. Because I don't have a strong understanding of how those things work. But ultimately, I didn't really need it. I just went into each individual pieces and constrained it to, you know, whatever value it needed to move on, and I just adjusted it like that, and my end results ended up being passable. And I think that's probably one of the most difficult things to tackle when you're new to Live2D, is managing multiple objects at once. I think ultimately the grouping and creating the mesh is probably the most complex part about Live2D, and making sure that everything's moving in tandem in the right way. But through a little bit of trial and error, you can just kind of move things around individually, and you don't have to think too hard about the groupings. But obviously, you'll save yourself a lot of time if you just look up a guide to properly group your layers. So I definitely recommend looking a little bit deeper into that, but if you really want to just get something done, it's not 100% needed. And also, I find that one of the most helpful things when you're rigging is to have a really solidly cleaned up, cutted up model. I think most of your work will be done for you if you just have a nice clean model. Because if we're omitting like really fancy type of movement and and just go for something basic like head turning left to right, looking up and down, body tilting left to right, with a little bit of entire body kind of forward and back tilt, with, you know, basic eye tracking, blinking, and mouth movement, it's surprisingly simple to just get that done. You don't even need to open up any crazy windows to make sure that happens, right? You don't even have to add in physics if you don't want to. And if you do want to add in physics, it's actually not that hard, because I did add a little bit of physics to the hair. But in my opinion, just to get your model moving in a somewhat passable looking way, there's not a whole lot of work to it. especially if you keep your design a little bit simpler with less moving parts. And if you're, intelligent, unlike me, who chose a weird sideways tilted sitting pose, it's really not that bad. So when it comes to meshes, I definitely had some issues with creating something that is nice and easy to handle, because the meshes I ended up creating didn't really move in the way I wanted to, so that's why the mouth ended up being a little bit jank. But generally speaking, if you're uncomfortable with creating your own mesh, the auto mesh function should do fine for you. Obviously, this is, a quick and dirty way to rig. So if you just want to use the auto functions for most of these things, they work fine. For professionals, obviously, they're a lot more limiting because you can't control the shapes as accurately. But for our purposes, I think just going the simple auto way will be sufficient enough. Personally, I think you should probably put the most effort into making sure your blink and your face turn looks good, as well as your mouth opening animation. Because most of the time, obviously, whoever's looking at your model will be looking at your face. And so if your body is stiff, but you have a decent looking face, then, the face is doing the heavy lifting. It doesn't matter that the body doesn't fucking move. We just need the face to look good, right? So I think you should focus all your efforts into making the face look as good as possible. Be very careful with the eyes, because that has the most complex amount of parts. You can see in this video that I actually had to go back and fix some areas in Photoshop, which is something you can do. You can go back to Photoshop and change up some of your layers and details and stuff. Throw the file back into the rig and it'll retain everything as if nothing changed, except with your Photoshop fixes, as long as you don't mess with the layers or the naming. So that's a pretty useful thing to know that you can go back to Photoshop and fix whatever drawing mistakes you may have made. If you did a symmetrical model, you actually save yourself so much more time, because whatever you rig on one side of the body, you can hit the reflect button on these parameters, and it'll just repeat the animations except for the other side. So realistically, when you're doing it, you should do it way faster than me, because I did the stupid way where I have to manually do both sides and each side looks different. But I wanted this look, so I had to suffer. And like I said before, I wanted to keep the body relatively simple, so I just gave it a very simple but realistic-ish looking tilt, where I turn the body left and right and it shifts in a somewhat natural way. And the legs also move. I didn't add in anything crazy fancy to the body movement. And again, when you're starting out, you probably shouldn't aim for that. You should aim for something a little bit simpler, get going, and then maybe upgrade down the line. I don't think you should really start out with something so insane. But if you do want to make a big splash and debut with something fucking crazy and get like 2,000 Twitter followers right off the bat, that is an option for you if you want to take the risk. I know it's paid off for a lot of different people, but there's also a lot of people that invest a lot of money right off the bat, find out that they can't even stick to a streaming schedule, and just, they just fucking faded away and sold their model for, half the price. So that's something to think about. And we are about done with the rig, and right here I will show you. And yeah, that's about it for this video. Again, thank you for watching. We'll probably go back to more traditional drawing content next week. Yeah, I'll catch you later.